The needle on the fuel gauge trembled on empty, a final, mocking shudder before it died. Clara's hands shook in unison, her knuckles white against the steering wheel of the stalled sedan. Tears blurred the grimy gas station lights into cruel, shimmering stars. Her phone was a dead black rectangle in her purse, another casualty of his rage, hurled against a wall the night before. She was stranded, isolated, and a cold dread seeped into her bones, colder than the biting night air. A deep, guttural rumble tore through the quiet hum of the highway, growing from a distant growl to an earth-shaking thunder. A Harley-Davidson, a beast of gleaming chrome and black steel, rolled into the fluorescent oasis of the gas station, its rider a silhouette of leather and denim. He swung a heavy boot over the side, the bike settling with a metallic sigh. Patches adorned his leather vest, the most prominent a winged death's head that seemed to stare right through her. Hell's Angels. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. Fear was a constant companion, but this was a new, sharper kind. He moved with a predator's economy, his heavy boots crunching on the oil-stained concrete. He stopped a few feet from her car, his face shadowed by the station's overhang. She could see the weathered lines around his eyes, a thick, dark beard, and a gaze that missed nothing. He didn't look at her car. He looked at her. He saw the tear tracks on her cheeks, the frantic way she clutched the steering wheel, the almost invisible tremor in her lower lip. He saw the ghost of a bruise, a faint purple shadow, peeking from the collar of her blouse. "You all right, ma'am?" His voice was a low gravel, a sound that seemed to come from the same deep place as his motorcycle's engine. It wasn't aggressive. It was calm, measured, and that was somehow more disarming. Clara couldn't speak. A nod was too much. A shake of the head was a lie. She was trapped in the paralysis of her terror. He seemed to understand. He gestured with a thumb toward her gas tank. "Out of fuel." She managed a single, jerky nod. "Got a can." She shook her head this time, a fresh wave of tears threatening. He was supposed to fill it. The words were a choked whisper. The biker, whose vest identified him as Rook, didn't press. He simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement. "Stay put. I'll handle it." He turned and walked toward the convenience store, his presence a solid, intimidating mass that made the lone cashier inside visibly straighten his spine. Clara watched him go, a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. Not hope, that was too dangerous a word, but a strange, momentary sense of stillness. The world had stopped spinning its terrifying spiral for just a second. Rook returned with a red gas can, paid for with a crumpled bill from his pocket. He didn't ask for money, didn't even look like he expected it. He knelt by her car, the scent of gasoline sharp and clean in the air as he began to pour the fuel into her tank. It was a simple act of kindness, an island of decency in her ocean of fear. And that's when the headlights sliced through the darkness. A black Mercedes sedan screeched into the station, parking so close to her car that it blocked her in. Richard Sterling stepped out, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the grimy surroundings. His smile was a thin, cruel slash on his handsome face, but his eyes were chips of ice. "Clara, darling, having a little trouble." His voice was smooth, cultured, and utterly venomous. He ignored Rook completely, his focus a laser beam of possessive rage aimed at her. He strode to her door and yanked it open. Get out of the car, his fingers clamped around her arm, a vice grip that made her whimper. The fresh pain lanced over the old bruises he'd put there. "What is this?" Richard's gaze finally fell on Rook, who had slowly risen to his full height. The gas can was still in his hand. "Can't you see my wife is in distress? Get your filthy hands off my property and crawl back to whatever ditch you slithered out of." Rook's face remained impassive, but a muscle ticked in his jaw. His eyes, dark and unreadable, flicked from Richard's manicured hand on Clara's arm to the terror in her eyes. He saw the way she flinched, the way her body tried to curl in on itself, a subconscious effort to become a smaller target. "I was just helping the lady," Rook said, his voice dangerously low. "She ran out of gas." Richard laughed, a short, ugly bark. "She's forgetful. Aren't you, my love?" He squeezed her arm harder, and a tear finally escaped, tracing a path through the dust on her cheek. Now, I suggest you get on your pathetic little toy and ride away before you find yourself in a world of trouble you can't possibly comprehend. He gave Rook a hard shove in the chest. It was a mistake. Rook didn't budge, solid as an oak tree. He didn't retaliate. He simply stood there, absorbing the shove, his gaze hardening into something ancient and lethal. The air crackled. In that instant, Rook wasn't just a biker helping a stranger. He was a witness. And Richard Sterling had just made him an enemy. He watched Richard drag Clara toward the Mercedes, her feet stumbling on the pavement. Before shoving her inside, Richard turned back. Remember this, grease monkey. Some people are untouchable. The Mercedes roared to life and sped away, leaving Rook standing in the lingering scent of gasoline and expensive cologne. He stood motionless for a long moment, the red gas can hanging from his hand. The image of Clara's terrified face was burned into his mind, superimposed over another face, another time. His sister, Sarah, 15 years gone. The same haunted eyes, the same carefully hidden bruises. He'd been young then, too caught up in his own rebellion to see the monster wearing a charming smile who had courted her, married her, and then slowly extinguished her light. He'd ignored the signs, the canceled plans, the nervous excuses, the long sleeves in summer. By the time he understood, it was too late. The official report said she tripped, a tragic accident down a flight of stairs. He knew better. He'd lived with that failure, that suffocating guilt, every single day since. It was the ghost that rode on his shoulder, the cold that lingered even on the hottest days. Tonight, that ghost was screaming. He would not fail again. Across the street, parked in the shadows, another Harley rumbled quietly. Its rider, a mountain of a man with a wild beard and the patch grizz on his vest, had seen the whole exchange. Rook lifted his hand, a quick, sharp gesture. "Follow them." Grizz nodded once, kicked his bike into gear, and melted into the traffic, a shadow hunting a predator. Rook's own engine exploded to life, a roar of defiance and promise that echoed through the empty night. It wasn't just an engine. It was the sound of a reckoning. The drive to the house was a symphony of silent terror. Richard didn't speak, but the rage radiated from him, filling the luxurious interior of the car with a suffocating pressure. Clara kept her eyes fixed on her lap, on her trembling hands. She could feel his stare on her, dissecting her, judging her. Any moment now, the calm would break and the storm would hit. She braced herself. They lived in a glass and steel monstrosity at the end of a long, private road, a house that was meant to look like a symbol of success, but felt like a mausoleum. He'd called it their fortress. She knew it was her prison. As soon as the heavy oak door clicked shut behind them, his control snapped. He spun her around, his face inches from hers, his breath hot with fury. "Who was he?" he hissed. "Nobody," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He was just helping." He laughed, the sound sharp and brittle. "You look pathetic, crying by the side of the road, letting some filth put his hands on my car. You embarrass me. Clara." He threw her against the wall. Her head connected with the plaster with a sickening thud, and bright spots danced in her vision. She slid to the floor, gasping for air. This was the familiar rhythm of her life, the violent punctuation to his moods. A flashback, sharp and unwelcome, pierced through the pain. The night before, he'd been searching for a financial document, his frustration mounting with every passing second. He'd accused her of moving it, of deliberately trying to sabotage him. She denied it, her voice shaking. That was all it took. The back of his hand had connected with her cheek, the force of it sending her stumbling. "You are nothing without me," he had snarled, standing over her. "If you ever think of leaving, I will find you, and I will destroy everything you have ever loved. Your mother in that nursing home, your brother and his little family, they will pay for your disobedience." The threat hung in the air now, as real and as solid as the wall at her back. He was a man of immense power and zero conscience. He could do it. She knew he could. Outside, hidden by a row of dense pine trees, Rook and Grizz watched the house. The lights were on, illuminating the cold, sterile architecture. It looked impenetrable. "What's the play, Rook?" Grizz asked, his voice a low rumble in his throat. "Mike, we wait." Rook answered, his eyes never leaving the second-floor window. "We watched." Grizz pulled out his phone, his thick fingers surprisingly nimble on the small screen. He was the club's unofficial tech expert and information broker. "Richard Sterling," he murmured, reading from a private database he had access to. "CEO of Sterling Developments. Big shot real estate mogul. Got his hands in everything. Rumors of mob ties, union busting, making inconvenient zoning problems disappear. He's not just a wife beater, brother. He's a professional scumbag. Makes sense," Rook said grimly. "Men like that, they think the world belongs to them. Everyone in it is just a prop. Got a lot of security," Grizz noted, scrolling further. "Motion sensors, cameras, the works. A direct approach is messy." "We're not looking for messy," Rook replied. "We're looking for a sign, an invitation." Inside, Richard had regained his composure. He smoothed his suit jacket and looked down at Clara with cold disdain. "Pack a bag," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Just the essentials. We're leaving. Going on a little trip, just the two of us." A fresh start. Clara's blood ran cold. She knew what a fresh start meant. It meant a new house, a new city, even further from anyone who might help her. It meant disappearing completely. It was a life sentence, or worse. As he turned and went to his own study to gather his things, she scrambled to her feet, her mind racing. The pain in her head was a dull throb, but the adrenaline was a fire. She crept to the large living room window, peering through a small gap in the heavy curtains. And she saw them, just the faintest glint of chrome under a distant streetlight. Two motorcycles parked with practiced stillness. They had followed her. They were out there. A tiny, impossible spark ignited in the cold darkness of her despair. It was a wild, desperate chance, a prayer to a god she no longer believed in. She had to signal them. She had to let them know. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for anything. Her gaze fell upon a small wooden chest on the mantelpiece. Inside was one of her few remaining treasures, a bright red silk scarf, a gift from her mother from time before Richard, a time when she was still herself. It was a vibrant, defiant splash of color in this monochrome prison. Her heart pounding, she slipped the scarf from the box. Richard was still in his study. She could hear him on the phone, his voice a low, angry murmur. She crept up the grand staircase, her stockinged feet silent on the polished wood. The master bathroom. The window was small, but it faced the right direction. With trembling fingers, she unlatched it, pushing it open just a crack. The cold night air rushed in, a breath of freedom. She took the red scarf, held it for a second, a silent apology to her mother, and then let it go. It fluttered in the wind, a tiny crimson bird taking flight, before snagging on the branch of a rose bush directly below the window. It was small. It was subtle. It might be nothing, but it was all she had. Down the street, Rook saw the flash of red. It was almost nothing, a flicker of color against the dark stone of the house, but it was there. He raised his binoculars. A red scarf, caught on a thorn bush. It hadn't been there before. It was a flag, a flare, an invitation. "That's it," he said, his voice tight. "That's the sign." Grizz lowered his own binoculars. "Could be anything, man." "The wind." "No." Rook cut him off. "It's her. I know it." He thought of Sarah again, of all the silent pleas he had missed. He wouldn't miss this one. He pulled out his phone and hit a single button on his speed dial. The call was answered on the first ring. "Preacher," Rook said, using the road name of his vice president. "I need the chapter." Now, there was no hesitation on the other end of the line. "Where?" Rook gave him the address. "And preach. Tell them to come quiet. We're ringing the devil's doorbell, and we don't want to wake the neighbors until the party starts." He hung up. A deep sense of calm settled over him. This was what they did. They were the monsters who hunted monsters. They were the justice for the voiceless. The rumble began 10 minutes later. It started as a whisper, a distant vibration felt more in the chest than heard with the ears. It grew steadily, a gathering storm of controlled power. One by one, a dozen Harleys filtered onto the private road, their headlights cutting through the darkness, but their engines held to a low, menacing growl. They formed a semicircle around the entrance to the long driveway, a silent, leather-clad army. They were shadows and steel, their faces grim, their purpose clear. Inside, Richard was dragging a suitcase down the stairs. "Time to go, Clara. The car is in the garage. Don't make this difficult." That's when he heard it. The low, synchronized rumble of idling V-twin engines. He froze, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. He went to the window, pulled back the curtain, and his jaw tightened. The street was blocked. A wall of bikers sat on their machines, watching his house. At the head of the pack was the one from the gas station. Rook. Richard's confusion morphed into incandescent rage. The audacity, the sheer unmitigated gall of this gutter trash. "Stay here," he snarled at Clara, and stormed toward the front door. He was Richard Sterling. He would not be intimidated by thugs. Rook dismounted, walking slowly up the manicured stone path to the front door, alone. He moved with the unhurried confidence of a man who knew he held all the cards. The rest of the club stayed put, their engines a throbbing promise of violence. The door was thrown open. Richard stood there, his face contorted in a mask of fury. "I told you to leave," he spat. "You have 5 seconds to get off my property before I call the police and have you all arrested for trespassing." "We're not here to trespass," Rook said calmly, his voice carrying easily in the quiet night. "We're here for her. Let her walk out that door, and we're gone." Richard let out a disbelieving laugh. "You in what army?" As if on cue, a dozen engines roared in unison, the sound of physical blow that shook the very air. The bikers switched on their high beams, flooding the front of the house with blinding white light. Richard flinched back, momentarily stunned. The army had just answered. Panicked, he lunged back inside and grabbed Clara, pulling her in front of him, one arm locked around her throat. "You want her? Come and get her!" he screamed, his polished veneer completely gone, revealing the desperate coward beneath. That was the last mistake he would ever make. Rook didn't even flinch. He just gave a slight nod. Grizz and 2 other bikers were already off their bikes, moving with a speed that belied their size. They flanked the door, coming from the shadows of the porch. While Richard's attention was locked on Rook, Grizz burst through the door, a force of nature. He hit Richard with a shoulder tackle that sent both of them sprawling to the floor. Clara was thrown free, scrambling away from the violence, her breath coming in ragged sobs. The fight was short and brutal. Richard came up with a fireplace poker, swinging wildly. Grizz disarmed him with a single, practiced move, twisting his wrist until a sickening crack echoed in the hall. The poker clattered to the marble floor. Richard howled in pain, clutching his broken arm. It was over. The bikers didn't lay another hand on him. They simply stood over him, their shadows immense and unforgiving. Rook walked past the scene and knelt in front of Clara. He gently took her arm. "It's over," he said softly. "You're safe now." And for the first time, she believed it. Just as Grizz was hauling a whimpering Richard to his feet, the distant wail of sirens grew closer. Grizz had made the anonymous tip 20 minutes ago, mentioning suspected drug trafficking and financial crimes at the Sterling residence, details he'd gleaned from his deep dive online. When the police arrived, they found a broken, incoherent Richard Sterling, a terrified but safe Clara, and a house full of evidence of a much larger criminal enterprise. The bikers were gone, vanished back into the night as quietly as they had come, leaving justice in their wake. Their final destination was the clubhouse, a nondescript warehouse on the industrial side of town. Inside, it was warm and loud, smelling of beer, leather, and old smoke. But a space was cleared for Clara. She sat on a worn leather couch, a heavy club blanket draped over her shoulders, a steaming mug of coffee in her hands. The shaking had finally stopped. Rook sat on a stool opposite her, silent, giving her space. He had cleaned a small cut on his knuckle, and now just watched, ensuring she was okay. He finally spoke, his voice gentle. "We have a friend," he said. "She runs a shelter. A good one. Safe. They can help you with everything else. Legal stuff. A new place. Whatever you need." He slid a small, plain white card across the table. It had only a name and a number. You don't have to be alone in this. Clara looked up from the card, her eyes meeting his. She saw no pity in his gaze, only a quiet, profound respect. She looked around the clubhouse at the rough, intimidating men who had ridden into hell for a complete stranger. They weren't thugs. They were guardians. She saw her own reflection in the polished chrome of a nearby fuel tank. The woman staring back was not the same one who had been crying at the gas station. Her face was pale and bruised, but her eyes held a new light, a flicker of steel. The fear was still there, a ghost in the back of her mind, but it was no longer her master. She was free. "Thank you," she whispered, the words feeling impossibly small for the magnitude of what they had done. Rook simply nodded. "No one deserves to live in fear. We're the Hell's Angels. We have a code. We protect our own. And tonight, that included you." Her journey was far from over, but for the first time in a decade, the road ahead wasn't a terrifying, dead-end street. It was an open highway. She took a deep breath, the air tasting of freedom, and knew, with absolute certainty, that she would never be a victim again. She was a survivor. There are heroes all around us, often in the places we least expect. They don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear leather and ride Harleys. If you believe in the power of brotherhood and standing up for the innocent, share this story. Let us know in the comments what true heroism means to you. And never forget to support those who are fighting their own silent battles.